It was a hot summer, and my Uncle Jack had just come back to town after being away for years. He wasn't the same man I remembered. There was something off about him, something lurking beneath his smile. But what really stood out was his chips. He had always been a bit of a chef, experimenting with different recipes, but these chips, there was something different about them. They were golden, crispy, and smelled like heaven. He said they were his secret recipe, something he perfected while he was away. Everyone in the neighborhood was obsessed. My friends couldn't stop talking about them. The town's little store could barely keep up with the demand. It wasn't long before I got curious. I mean, they were just chips, right? How could a snack stir up so much excitement? So one evening, I asked my uncle if I could watch him make a batch. He hesitated at first, his usual smile fading for a moment before it crept back, stretched tight across his face. "All right, kiddo, you can help me tonight," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. Later that night, I found myself in his kitchen, the air thick with the smell of oil and frying potatoes. He handed me a knife and gestured to a sack of potatoes sitting by the counter. I started slicing, but something about the texture of the potatoes felt strange. They were soft, almost fleshy, and had a weird, faint odor, nothing like the fresh ones we usually had. I glanced at my uncle, who was busy stirring a pot of boiling oil, humming an odd, unfamiliar tune. "Where do you get these potatoes, Uncle Jack?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to me slowly, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the kitchen. "They're special," he finally said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Not from around here. You could say I found them abroad." His words sent a chill down my spine. Abroad? He hadn't mentioned where he'd been for the past few years, and now I wondered if I really wanted to know. As I sliced deeper into the potatoes, I noticed something horrifying. There, embedded in the center of one of the pieces, was something that looked like a fingernail. My stomach turned. I dropped the knife and took a step back, staring at the pile of potatoes in front of me. There were more, bits of hair, small bones, and chunks that looked far too much like skin. "Uncle, what is this?" My voice cracked as I backed away. He didn't look surprised. In fact, he smiled wider, his teeth showing now, unnervingly sharp. "I told you they're special. You wanted to know the secret, didn't you?" I tried to bolt for the door, but Uncle Jack was faster than I expected. His grip on my arm was cold, his fingers pressing into my skin like a vice. "You'll understand soon enough," he whispered, dragging me toward the pot of bubbling oil. The smell was overpowering now, sickly sweet and rancid, nothing like the delicious aroma from earlier. I kicked and fought, but he was too strong. He forced me closer to the pot, his voice in my ear, chanting some words I couldn't understand. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the shiny surface of the oil, my face pale and terrified. And then, just as my head was inches from the scalding oil, everything went black. When I woke up, I was alone in the kitchen. The pot was empty, and the counters were spotless. No sign of the horrifying things I'd seen. I staggered to my feet and ran out of the house, not stopping until I was far, far away. The next day, the entire town was still buzzing about Uncle Jack's chips. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Who would believe me? But one thing was certain. No matter how popular those chips were, I would never eat them again. And neither should anyone else. But the worst part? Uncle Jack's chips are everywhere now. He's opened up shops in nearby towns. People can't get enough. They're obsessed. And every time I pass one of his stores, I hear the same whispering chant in my head that I heard in his kitchen that night. They're not potatoes. They're something else.
It all started when I found the notebook at a yard sale. It wasn't anything special, just a plain black leather-bound book, the kind you'd see in any stationery store. But something about it called to me. It was buried under a pile of old, dusty books, forgotten. The moment I touched it, I felt a strange chill run down my spine, but I shrugged it off. The seller, an old woman with gray hair and hollow eyes, gave me a look when I brought it to her. "That notebook belonged to someone long gone," she said, her voice gravely. "Be careful what you write in it." I laughed it off, thinking she was just trying to make the sale sound mysterious. I paid her, tossed the notebook in my bag, and forgot about it for a few days. One night, after a particularly stressful day at work, I found myself pulling the notebook out of my bag. I had always enjoyed journaling, and something about writing out my thoughts calmed me down. I opened the first page and found it blank, the paper unusually smooth beneath my fingertips. Grabbing a pen, I wrote a simple sentence: "I wish I didn't have to go to work tomorrow." I sighed, closed the notebook, and went to bed, not thinking anything of it. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my boss. "Office closed for the day due to a power outage. Enjoy your day off." I was stunned. It was exactly what I had written in the notebook. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but curiosity gnawed at me. That night, I tested it again. I opened the notebook and wrote, "I hope it rains tomorrow." The next day, clouds rolled in, and by afternoon, it was pouring. The chill I'd felt when I first touched the notebook crept back in, but now it was mixed with excitement. What was this thing? Could it really make my wishes come true? Over the next few days, I began to test its limits. I wrote small, harmless things, wishing for a good meal, for my favorite show to be on TV. Each time, it happened just as I wrote. But I couldn't stop there. The power was intoxicating, and soon, I was writing bigger wishes. That's when things started to go wrong. One night, drunk on the idea of control, I wrote something I never should have. I wish my neighbor would disappear. She was always so loud, always slamming doors and playing music late at night. I didn't mean it, at least not entirely. It was just frustration. But the next morning, she was gone. Her apartment was empty, like she had never even lived there. The landlord said she moved out in the middle of the night, no notice, no forwarding address. But I knew the truth. The notebook had made her disappear. Panic set in. I tried to stop using the notebook to hide it away, but the temptation was always there. The power was too great. I started to fear what it could do, and more importantly, what I had done. The weight of my neighbor's disappearance hung over me like a dark cloud. One evening, while I was trying to resist the urge to write in the notebook, I noticed something strange. The pages I had written in before were no longer blank. Instead, they were filled with tiny, spidery handwriting that wasn't mine. It was a list of names, people I had never heard of, and next to each name, a date. Horrified, I realized the dates were the exact days I had written my wishes. My neighbor's name was on the list, too. I grabbed the notebook, determined to destroy it. But no matter what I did, tearing it, burning it, soaking it in water, the notebook remained intact. It was as if it was indestructible, its power unbreakable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, haunted by the thought of the notebook. Eventually, I gave in, opening it once more. I didn't want to write anything, but something in me, or in the notebook, forced my hand. My fingers trembled as I wrote, "I wish I never found this notebook." I snapped the notebook shut and threw it into a drawer, hoping it would all just stop. But when I woke up the next morning, nothing had changed. The notebook was still there, and its pages were filled with more names. Names of people I didn't know, people who were gone. And then, at the bottom of the list, I saw my own name. The date next to it? Today. I dropped the notebook, heart pounding. But it was too late. The room grew cold, and I could feel something watching me closing in. My fate had been written.
My name's Evan, and I've been a paramedic for 6 years. In that time, I've seen a lot of things that would make most people lose sleep. But there's one call I'll never forget, one ride that changed everything. It was a quiet night, unusually so. My partner Sarah and I were parked in our usual spot, waiting for dispatch. We hadn't had a call for hours, and the city streets were eerily empty, save for the occasional car passing by. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. Unit 17, we've got a 1045, possible cardiac arrest, 112 Riverton Avenue. Respond immediately. We flipped the lights on and sped through the streets. Riverton Avenue wasn't far, but it was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. When we arrived, the house looked abandoned, old, with boarded up windows and a front yard overgrown with weeds. Sarah and I exchanged uneasy glances. No one in the neighborhood seemed to be around, and there was no sign of anyone waiting outside. We grabbed our gear and made our way to the front door. I knocked, but there was no answer. The air was thick, and every instinct I had told me something was off. Sarah tried the door. It creaked open, revealing a dark, musty hallway. "Hello?" I called out, but only silence greeted us. We stepped inside cautiously, our flashlights slicing through the darkness. The house smelled old, like it hadn't been lived in for years. There was no furniture, no pictures on the walls, just dust and decay. Then we heard it, a soft, faint voice coming from upstairs. It was barely audible, but it sounded like someone calling for help. "Let's go," Sarah said, leading the way. The stairs creaked beneath our weight as we ascended, our footsteps echoing through the empty house. When we reached the top, we found a long, dark hallway lined with closed doors. The voice was clearer now, but it didn't sound quite right. It was distorted, like it was coming from somewhere far away. We approached the door at the end of the hall, where the sound seemed to be coming from. I knocked again, my heart pounding in my chest. "Paramedics," I called out. "We're here to help." No answer. I pushed the door open, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the middle of the room, was an old hospital gurney. On it lay a man, pale, motionless, with eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. He wasn't breathing. His skin had the grayish hue of someone long gone. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the ambulance sitting just outside the window. Our ambulance. Except we hadn't parked it there. Sarah and I froze. How could it be outside when we had parked in front? And why was the engine still running? The lights weren't flashing, but the unmistakable hum of the engine filled the room. "What the hell is this?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. My mind raced. Something was horribly wrong. But before I could think, the man on the gurney blinked. I jumped back, nearly dropping my flashlight. He blinked again, slowly, and then his mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes rolled toward me, wide and filled with something I couldn't describe. Fear, despair, anger, whatever it was, it made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the radio on my belt crackled. I fumbled to answer it, desperate for some explanation. "Unit 17, what's your location? We lost GPS on you. Are you responding to the call?" I froze. I brought the radio to my mouth and stammered, "We're at 112 Riverton Avenue. We're here." There was a pause, and then the dispatcher's voice came back, more confused than before. "There's no 112 Riverton Avenue on file. Are you sure about the address?" I looked at Sarah, panic rising in my chest. We were standing in the house. The address had been clear. But now, it didn't exist? "We need to get out of here," Sarah muttered, backing away from the gurney. As we turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind us. The room plunged into darkness, the only light now coming from the ambulance's headlights outside the window. We rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Something or someone was keeping us inside. And then we heard it, the siren. That low, mournful wail of an ambulance on the move, except this one was coming closer. The engine revved, the sound growing louder, and I swear I could feel the vibration in the floor beneath my feet. I turned toward the window, watching as the ambulance slowly backed away, leaving us behind. The man on the gurney began to move, sitting up, his bones creaking with unnatural stiffness. His eyes never left us. He whispered something under his breath, and though I couldn't make out the words, it felt like a warning. I don't remember how we got out of that house. One moment we were trapped, the next we were running down the stairs and out into the street, gasping for air. The house loomed behind us, dark and silent, as if it had swallowed whatever nightmare lived inside. But the ambulance was gone. Sarah and I never spoke about that night again. We didn't tell anyone. And since then, I've made sure to avoid Riverton Avenue. It's not on any map, anyway. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the wail of an ambulance siren in the distance. And I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, looking for its next passenger.